What do wire hangers, mysterious deaths, and studio-supplied pharmaceuticals have in common? They're all part of the stories Hollywood never wanted you to hear about your favorite Golden Age stars. Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes. Frank Sinatra could make you swoon with the way you look tonight, then assault a photographer in the parking lot. The person with the golden voice had fists of fury and an extraordinarily bad temper. Sure, he was one of the greatest entertainers of all time, but cross him once and you'd be on his list forever. Behind the swagger was a deeply insecure person, shaped by devastating childhood experiences. Born in Hoboken, New Jersey, to working-class Italian immigrants, Frank was a sickly, underweight child who was mercilessly bullied for his appearance. Kids called him Scarface because of prominent scars from a traumatic birth that required forceps delivery. His mother, Dolly, was a domineering, often violent woman who abandoned Frank for days at a time to pursue her political activities. She would lock him in a room when she went out, leaving him alone and terrified. The loneliness and abandonment of his childhood created a lifelong fear of being alone and a desperate need for constant attention and approval. Sinatra described himself as an 18-carat manic depressive, and boy, did he live up to it. His mood swings were legendary. One night in Hong Kong, a missed lighting cue sent him into such a rage that he destroyed his dressing room and hotel suite, smashing priceless antiques. Another time, he drove a golf cart through a glass window in a drunken fury. Just another Tuesday for Frank. His temper was explosive and often violent. He once threw a phone at a hotel worker who woke him up. He regularly destroyed property, throwing plates of pasta at restaurant walls if the food wasn't perfect, smashing champagne bottles, demolishing furniture. At the Sands Casino, after losing $500,000, he tried to set fire to the curtains and drove a golf cart through the lobby's glass doors. But it wasn't just property that suffered. Sinatra had a special hatred for journalists and photographers. He called them finks and parasites, and often got physical. He attacked photographer Eddie Schisser. He had columnist Lee Mortimer beaten up in a nightclub. When a reporter asked about his mob connections, Sinatra's bodyguards broke the person's nose. Speaking of the mob, Sinatra's connections to organized crime were an open secret. He was best friends with Sam Giancana, head of the Chicago outfit. He hung out with Lucky Luciano in Cuba. The FBI had approximately 2,000 pages of files on him. When JFK distanced himself from Sinatra because of these mob ties, choosing to stay with Bing Crosby instead of Frank's Palm Springs compound, Sinatra went ballistic. He took a sledgehammer to the helipad he'd built specially for the president. His treatment of women was appalling. He married 4 times and cheated constantly. With his second wife, Ava Gardner, their relationship was so volatile that they'd have screaming matches that ended with thrown objects and threats. He called Marilyn Monroe stupid during their affair. When Mia Farrow refused to give up her career for him, he had her served with papers on the set of Rosemary's Baby. The story that really shows Sinatra's cruel streak involves comedian Shecky Greene. During a party, Greene made a joke about Frank's height. Sinatra had his associates work Greene over so badly that the comedian ended up in the hospital. But here's the twisted part. Sinatra then sent flowers and offered to pay the medical bills, like some kind of demented mob boss. But here's the paradox that defined Sinatra: his capacity for incredible generosity. He raised over $1 billion for various charities throughout his career, often performing for free at benefits. He would anonymously pay mortgages for struggling friends, cover medical bills for sick musicians, and send money to war veterans and hospital patients he'd never met. He once paid for an entire stranger's cancer treatment after reading about their plight in a newspaper. When Sammy Davis Jr. lost his eye in a car accident, Sinatra secretly covered all his medical expenses. He supported the civil rights movement when it was dangerous for a white entertainer to do so, refusing to perform in venues that discriminated against black audiences. Most of these acts of kindness were done anonymously. Sinatra preferred to be known as Mr. Anonymous when it came to charity. The saddest part? Multiple attempts to harm himself throughout his life. When his career was failing in the early 1950s, he turned on the gas and stuck his head in the oven. During his tumultuous marriage to Ava Gardner, there were more attempts. Behind the swagger was a deeply troubled person who hated himself as much as he hated his enemies. Judy Garland. Before we continue, we can't forget about the most tragic star of them all. Judy Garland, the girl who sang Over the Rainbow, lived through a nightmare that makes all our other stories look tame. She was Hollywood's most beloved victim, and the studio system literally fed her controlled substances from childhood to control her every move. Born Frances Gumm in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, Judy's tragedy began before she could even walk. Her mother, Ethel, was a frustrated performer who lived vicariously through her daughters, forcing them to perform in vaudeville shows from toddlerhood. By age 10, Judy was already being given amphetamines to keep her energetic for performances, then barbiturates to help her sleep. Her mother justified this as medicine to help Judy's career, but she was essentially creating a chemically dependent child. When MGM signed 13-year-old Judy in 1935, the studio took over where her mother left off. Studio executives would monitor her weight obsessively, putting her on near-starvation diets and forcing her to survive on chicken soup, stimulants, and cigarettes. They gave her uppers to work 18-hour days and downers to sleep, creating a vicious cycle that would destroy her health. By the time she filmed The Wizard of Oz at 17, she was already completely dependent on these substances. The studio's control was absolute and cruel. They called her fat and ugly, despite her obvious talent and beauty. When she gained weight, executives would tape her chest down and put her in painful corsets. They controlled every aspect of her life: what she ate, when she slept, who she could date. She was basically a prisoner in a gilded cage. Judy's personal life was chaotic. 5 marriages, countless affairs, and a desperate search for love that always ended in disappointment. Her husbands often exploited her financially, leaving her broke despite earning millions. What makes Judy's story particularly heartbreaking is glimpses of the person she could have been. When clean and sober, she was known for her kindness and generosity. She would spend hours talking to fans, especially sick children, often visiting hospitals unannounced. She supported civil rights causes and performed benefits for various charities. Despite her own suffering, she had tremendous empathy for others' pain. By the 1960s, Judy was a shell of herself. She was fired from films for erratic behavior, struggled through disastrous TV shows, and performed in third-rate venues just to pay her bills. She passed away alone in a London bathroom in 1969 at just 47 from an accidental overdose of barbiturates, the same substances the studios had been feeding her since childhood. Judy Garland's demise wasn't an accident or a tragedy. It was a slow destruction by 1,000 cuts, perpetrated by an industry that consumed her childhood, her health, and ultimately her life. John Wayne, the ultimate American hero, the cowboy who stood for truth, justice, and the American way. But the Duke's 1971 Playboy interview exposed him as a person with deeply prejudiced views who hid his opinions behind a tough guy persona. Let's start with the smoking gun. Wayne's exact words: "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." He also said he didn't feel guilty about taking land from Native Americans because there were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves. Wayne's behavior got worse when he drank, which was often. He'd show up to sets hungover and take out his misery on whoever was closest. He was notorious for picking fights with crew members, especially those he saw as weak. He once confronted Kirk Douglas about playing Van Gogh, saying, "Christ, Kirk, how can you play a part like that? There's so few of us left. We got to play strong, tough characters, not these weak individuals." This champion of American values, this symbol of wartime heroism, avoided World War II service, while other actors like Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart risked their lives. Wayne was 34 at the time of Pearl Harbor and received 3 family deferments, claiming he was the sole support of his family, all during his infidelity towards his wife with Marlene Dietrich and living the luxury life in Hollywood. Privately, Wayne struggled with shame about his war record for the rest of his life. He would become visibly upset when the topic was raised, and several close friends reported that he suffered from what we'd now recognize as survivor's guilt. Even his attempt to play Genghis Khan in The Conqueror was a problematic disaster. The film was shot downwind from nuclear test sites, and 91 cast and crew members developed cancer, with 46 passing away from it. Ironically, Wayne did have moments of private kindness that contradicted his public persona. He quietly supported several charities, particularly those helping sick children. After his own cancer diagnosis, he became a major advocate for cancer research, though he kept much of his charitable work private. He also maintained loyal friendships with liberal actors like Maureen O'Hara and directors like John Ford, despite their political differences. These contradictions made Wayne a complex figure, capable of both genuine warmth and shocking cruelty. Joan Crawford, the ultimate Hollywood diva, the queen of the silver screen, and according to her daughter, an absolute monster of a mother. On screen, Crawford was the epitome of glamour and sophistication, playing strong, independent women who clawed their way to the top. But at home, she allegedly ruled with an iron fist, wire hangers, and a level of psychological warfare that would make military interrogators take notes. Behind the glamorous facade was a woman shaped by devastating childhood abandonment. Born Lucille LeSueur in San Antonio, Texas, Crawford's father abandoned the family when she was just 10 months old, leaving her mother, Annabelle Johnson, to raise her in crushing poverty. They moved constantly between Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas City, with Crawford later estimating they moved 75 times throughout her childhood. She was often sent to work as a child laborer in boarding schools to help pay the bills, experiencing rejection and hardship that would fuel her lifelong need for control. Crawford adopted 4 children, Christina, Christopher, and twins Kathy and Cindy. But Christina's explosive 1978 memoir, Mommy Dearest, ripped the mask off, revealing a woman who was allegedly alcoholic, abusive, and obsessed with control. The book described night raids, where a drunk Crawford would wake the children at 3 a.m. and force them to scrub the house for hours. If they missed a spot, there'd be consequences. The most infamous incident? The wire hanger episode. Christina claimed that when Crawford discovered a forbidden wire hanger in her closet, she flew into a blind rage, striking her daughter with the hanger while screaming, "No wire hangers ever!" The scene became so iconic that Faye Dunaway's portrayal in the 1981 film turned it into a camp classic, though it represented real trauma for Christina. But here's where it gets complicated. Crawford's other children, the twins Kathy and Cindy, completely denied Christina's claims. They insisted their mother was loving and caring, even telling the press that Christina lived in her own reality. Kathy stated, "Our mommy was the best mother anyone ever had. So who was telling the truth?" Well, several Hollywood figures actually backed up parts of Christina's story. Helen Hayes admitted she witnessed Crawford's strict discipline. Director George Cukor said Crawford could be difficult and demanding. Even Crawford's own friends acknowledged she drank heavily and had a temper. The control Crawford exerted was excessive. At Christmas, the kids would be photographed with mountains of presents for publicity. But they could only keep one item. The rest went to charity or were saved to be regifted. They had to write thank you cards for every single gift, which Crawford would meticulously edit. She kept detailed records of their grades, weight, and athletic performance in ledgers, treating motherhood like a business venture. Yet there were glimpses of genuine kindness that Crawford kept carefully hidden. She quietly performed numerous charitable acts throughout her career, often anonymously. She would pay medical bills for struggling actors and their families, fund funerals for those who passed away broke, and regularly donated large sums to children's charities. These acts of generosity rarely made the papers. Crawford preferred to keep her philanthropy private, perhaps understanding that her public image demanded a different kind of perfection. Perhaps most tellingly, Crawford's will contained a single devastating line about Christina and Christopher. They were disinherited for reasons which are well known to them. Even from the grave, Crawford had to have the last word, the truth about what really happened in that household. may never be fully known. But one thing's certain. Behind Crawford's perfectly applied makeup and designer gowns was a deeply troubled woman whose need for control destroyed her family. Lana Turner. Lana Turner. The sweater girl, the ultimate blonde bombshell, and the woman at the center of one of Hollywood's most shocking scandals. Her life was like a film noir come to life, complete with gangsters, violence, and a teenage daughter who may or may not have ended someone's life to protect her mother. Turner's love life was chaotic from day one. 8 marriages to 7 people, she married one twice, countless affairs, and a dangerous attraction to bad boys. But no one was worse than Johnny Stompanato, a small-time hood with big-time connections to mobster Mickey Cohen. Stompanato pursued Turner relentlessly in 1957, showering her with gifts and attention. What she didn't know was that he was Cohen's bodyguard and enforcer, a violent criminal who saw Turner as either a meal ticket or a target for extortion, maybe both. Their relationship was a nightmare of jealousy and violence. Stompanato was insanely possessive. When Turner filmed Another Time, Another Place with Sean Connery, Stompanato flew to London and stormed onto the set with a weapon, threatening the future James Bond. Big mistake. Connery, a former bodybuilder and black belt, simply bent Stompanato's wrist back until he dropped the weapon. Stompanato was deported from England in disgrace. The abuse escalated. Stompanato would assault Turner, then apologize with flowers and jewelry. He threatened to disfigure her face, destroy her career, hurt her daughter. Turner tried to leave multiple times, but he always pulled her back with threats or promises. Then came Good Friday, April 4th, 1958. According to the official story, Turner and Stompanato were arguing in her bedroom. Her 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, heard the fight escalating. When she heard Stompanato threaten to harm her mother and grandmother, she grabbed a kitchen knife and ran upstairs. As Stompanato turned to attack Turner, Cheryl plunged the 8-inch blade into his stomach. Stompanato bled to demise on Turner's pink bedroom carpet. The inquest was a media circus. Turner gave an Oscar-worthy performance on the stand, sobbing as she described the abuse. The jury ruled it justifiable homicide. Cheryl had acted to defend her mother. But, was that really what happened? Investigative journalist Casey Sherman says the crime scene photos don't add up. No blood anywhere, except under the body. Impossible with an abdominal injury. The knife wound was too perfect, too precise for a panicked teenager. Some believe Turner ended Stompanato's life herself, and Cheryl took the blame, knowing a juvenile would face lesser consequences. Hollywood whispered about other possibilities. Was Stompanato blackmailing Turner? Did he have compromising photos? Was Mickey Cohen pulling the strings? Some claimed Cheryl and Stompanato were having an affair, and Turner harmed him in jealous rage, though Cheryl vehemently denied this in her autobiography. The scandal should have destroyed Turner's career, but Hollywood loves a comeback. Her next film, Imitation of Life, was her biggest hit. The public was fascinated by the real-life drama that seemed ripped from a movie script. Turner played the victim perfectly, and it worked. But the trauma haunted both mother and daughter. Cheryl attempted self-harm twice, ran away from boarding schools, struggled with addiction. She later revealed Stompanato had been inappropriate with her, adding another dark layer to the story. Turner threw herself into work and marriages, never addressing the pain. In her autobiography, Turner stuck to the official story. So did Cheryl in her memoir, Detour. But doubts linger. The truth was gone, along with Stompanato on that pink carpet, leaving only questions and Hollywood legend. What really happened that night? Was it a daughter protecting her mother? A mother protecting her daughter? Or something even darker? We'll never know for sure. Clara B. They called her the It Girl. Clara B. was the original symbol of attraction, the flapper who personified the Roaring Twenties. With her bee-stung lips, expressive eyes, and uninhibited appeal, she was everything your grandmother warned you about. But behind that carefree image was a woman spiraling into mental illness, scandal, and a complete nervous breakdown that ended her career at just 28 years old. Beau's rise from Brooklyn poverty to Hollywood stardom was like something out of a movie itself. Born into absolute nightmare conditions, Clara's childhood was marked by unimaginable trauma. Her father was often unemployed and violent, and her mother Sarah suffered from severe schizophrenia. The most horrifying incident occurred when 16-year-old Clara told her mother about her dreams of becoming an actress. Sarah, in a psychotic episode, held a kitchen knife to Clara's throat while she slept, attempting to harm her daughter rather than let her become a loose woman in pictures. Clara awoke to find the knife at her throat, her own mother's face twisted with madness above her. This traumatic experience would haunt Clara for the rest of her life, and she would later develop the same mental illness that destroyed her mother. By the mid-1920s, she was the biggest star in Hollywood, receiving 45,000 fan letters in a single month. But Bo didn't fit Hollywood's mold. She was working class, spoke with bad grammar, and refused to play by the rules. While other starlets carefully cultivated their images, Bo was unapologetically herself. She famously said, "I'm a curiosity in Hollywood. I'm a big freak because I'm myself." The studio executives who profited millions from her talent treated her with shocking cruelty. They openly mocked her weight, called her heavy and vulgar, and excluded her from industry social events. Despite being one of their biggest moneymakers, Paramount executives would humiliate her in meetings, making jokes about her Brooklyn accent and working class background. She found solace with the film crews rather than the stars, developing close friendships with cameramen, grips, and other working class people who reminded her of home. Bo's romantic escapades were legendary. Though contrary to popular myth, she did not have intimate relations with the entire USC football team. This salacious story was debunked by Snopes, which found that Bo simply entertained football players at her home, after games with food, music, and dancing. As USC quarterback Morley Drury told biographer David Sten, "Nothing happened. We never got involved in a bedroom scene or anything like that. We were too innocent." Her actual documented lovers included Gary Cooper, Bela Lugosi, and director Victor Fleming. She lived by her own rules, and Hollywood hated her for it. The scandals kept piling up. Her secretary tried to blackmail her, threatening to reveal Bo's romantic history. During the trial, intimate details of Bo's life were splashed across every newspaper. The secretary even claimed Bo had been intimate with her own doctor and her best friend's husband. Whether true or not, Bo's reputation was destroyed. In 1931, at the height of her fame, Bo had a complete mental breakdown. She was hospitalized at a sanitarium where doctors diagnosed her with shattered nerves, likely schizophrenia, the same illness that plagued her mother. She checked into the sanitarium, then married actor Rex Bell, and retired to Nevada. What makes Bo's story even more tragic is how the breakdown manifested. Friends reported that she would sometimes not recognize them, staring blankly as if seeing strangers. She developed an overwhelming fear of crowds and cameras, the very things that had made her famous. The vibrant, effervescent girl who had captivated America was slowly disappearing, consumed by the same mental illness that had tried to harm her as a child. Paramount, the studio that had made millions from her films, dropped her immediately. No support, no help, just goodbye. Bo tried a comeback but retired permanently at 28, spending the rest of her life in isolation with a live-in nurse. She passed away alone in 1965, with only her nurse present. The tragedy of Clara Bo is that she was punished for being exactly what Hollywood sold: attractive, uninhibited, and free. But while that image made money on screen, off-screen, it made her a pariah. She was too real, too raw, too honest for an industry built on illusion. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Here's a name that became synonymous with scandal itself. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Before the tragedy that destroyed him, Arbuckle was bigger than Charlie Chaplin, the highest paid actor in Hollywood, signing a deal for $1 million a year in 1921. He mentored Chaplin and discovered Buster Keaton. Then came Labor Day weekend, 1921, and nothing would ever be the same. Arbuckle's backstory makes his downfall even more heartbreaking. Born in Smith Center, Kansas, in 1887, he was abandoned by his father at a young age after his mother passed away. The nickname Fatty began as a cruel childhood taunt, that followed him throughout his life. By age 8, he was performing in vaudeville shows to survive, developing the graceful physical comedy that would make him famous. Despite his size, he was incredibly agile and athletic, able to do backflips and dance with surprising grace. His size became part of his charm on screen, but off-screen, it was a source of lifelong insecurity and pain. Arbuckle threw a party at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco to celebrate his new contract. Among the guests was Virginia Rappe, a young actress with a reputation as a party girl. What happened next depends on who you believe. According to the accusation, Arbuckle assaulted Rappe so violently that his 266-pound weight ruptured her bladder. The story got worse with each telling. Some claimed he used a Coca-Cola bottle or a piece of ice. Rappe passed away 4 days later of a ruptured bladder, and suddenly Arbuckle was charged with manslaughter. The truth was likely far different. Rappe had a history of bladder problems and may have been suffering from chronic cystitis. She'd had multiple abortions, illegal and dangerous at the time. The main witness against Arbuckle, Maud Delmont, was a known blackmailer with a criminal record who wasn't even allowed to testify because she kept changing her story. But the truth didn't matter. The newspapers, especially William Randolph Hearst's publications, had a field day. They painted Arbuckle as a heavy, perverted monster who crushed an innocent girl. Hearst reportedly said the scandal sold more papers than the sinking of the Lusitania. The first trial ended in a hung jury, 10-2 for acquittal. The second trial also resulted in a hung jury, this time 10-2 for conviction. Finally, in the third trial, the jury took just 6 minutes to acquit Arbuckle. They even issued a rare, formal apology. Acquittal is not enough for Roscoe Arbuckle. We feel that a great injustice has been done him. We feel also that it was our only plain duty to give him this exoneration. Roscoe Arbuckle is entirely innocent and free from all blame. But it was too late. Despite being legally cleared, Arbuckle's career was finished. The newly formed Hayes office banned him from making films. His movies were pulled from theaters. Former friends distanced themselves. He'd gone from Hollywood's highest paid star to persona non grata overnight. Arbuckle tried directing under the pseudonym William B. Goodrich, as in Will Be Good, but everyone knew who he was. He was reduced to performing in small vaudeville shows, a shadow of his former self. The person who had discovered Buster Keaton was now dependent on Keaton for work. In 1933, Arbuckle finally got another chance. Warner Brothers signed him for a series of comedy shorts that were surprisingly successful. There was talk of a comeback of feature films. On June 29, 1933, Arbuckle celebrated his first wedding anniversary with his third wife, saying, "This is the happiest day of my life." That night, he passed away from a heart attack in his sleep. He was 46. The Arbuckle scandal was Hollywood's first major scandal, setting the precedent for how the industry would handle controversy. Throw the star under the bus to save the system. It established the Hays Code and film censorship. Most tragically, it destroyed an innocent person whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jean Tierney. Jean Tierney was one of Hollywood's most beautiful actresses, the star of classics like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven. But behind that ethereal beauty was a woman whose life was destroyed by a single act of cruelty that led to tragedy, mental illness, and years of brutal medical treatment. Born into a wealthy Connecticut family in 1920, Jean seemed destined for a charmed life. She was educated at elite schools and had every advantage money could provide. But her privileged upbringing also came with enormous pressure to be perfect. The perfect daughter, the perfect beauty, the perfect star. This pressure would later make her particularly vulnerable when real tragedy struck. The incident that destroyed Tierney's life happened during World War II. While pregnant with her first child, she was performing at the Hollywood Canteen for servicemen when a female fan broke quarantine to meet her. The fan had German measles, but was so excited to meet Tierney that she snuck out anyway. Tierney contracted German measles from this encounter. The disease caused her daughter Daria to be born prematurely with severe developmental challenges, including deafness, blindness, and profound intellectual impairment. Years later, Tierney learned the identity of the fan who had infected her and discovered that the woman felt no remorse, proudly telling people at parties about meeting her favorite star. The guilt and rage from this revelation consumed Tierney. She blamed herself for not being more careful, for not protecting her unborn child better. The constant care required for Daria, combined with the knowledge that her daughter's disabilities were preventable, sent Tierney into a spiral of depression and anxiety. She began having panic attacks on movie sets and struggling to remember her lines. By the 1950s, Tierney's mental health was deteriorating rapidly. She had to drop out of films, including Mogambo, when she couldn't function. Her family committed her to various mental institutions, where she received barbaric treatments. The worst was the series of electroshock treatments, 27 sessions where electricity was shot through her brain while she was conscious and unrestrained. The treatments were supposed to cure her depression, but instead destroyed large portions of her memory. She later wrote, "I had been subjected to electric shock treatments that deadened my brain, stole chunks from my memory, and left me feeling brutalized." The memory loss was devastating for an actress who had built her career on her intelligence and emotional depth. She would forget entire films she had made, lose years of personal memories, and struggle to recognize old friends. The treatments left her feeling like a stranger to herself, unable to access the experiences and emotions that had made her who she was. Tierney eventually recovered enough to return to films in the 1960s, but she was never the same. The electroshock treatments had changed her personality, making her more withdrawn and fearful. She passed away in 1991, having spent over 30 years living with the consequences of those brutal treatments. Her story is a reminder of how little was understood about mental health in Hollywood's golden age, and how many stars suffered in silence rather than seek help that might destroy their careers. Dorothy Dandridge, here's a name that should be mentioned alongside all the great stars, but systemic prejudice kept her in the shadows. Dorothy Dandridge. She broke barriers as the first black woman nominated for Best Actress, but Hollywood's discriminatory practices destroyed her dreams and ultimately her life. Dandridge's breakthrough came with Carmen Jones in 1954, where her sensual performance as the title character made her a star and earned her that historic Oscar nomination. For a brief moment, it seemed like she might break through Hollywood's color barrier and become a true leading lady, but the industry had other plans. Despite her talent and beauty, Dandridge was offered only stereotypical roles: the tragic mulatto, the exotic temptress, the suffering servant. When she turned down demeaning parts, the phone stopped ringing. Hollywood simply had no idea what to do with a woman who refused to play by their rules. Her personal life was marked by tragic relationships. Her marriage to dancer Harold Nicholas ended partly due to his infidelity and gambling. Her affair with director Otto Preminger was passionate but doomed. He would never marry a black woman publicly. She struggled financially, making poor investments and being cheated by managers. Dandridge's final years were marked by a desperate attempt to find work in a changing Hollywood. By the 1960s, the civil rights movement was challenging old stereotypes, but new actresses like Diana Ross were getting the opportunities that should have been hers. She performed in low-budget films and nightclub acts, a far cry from her Oscar-nominated performance. The woman who should have been a superstar was reduced to playing dingy clubs and seedy venues. In 1965, at just 42, Dorothy Dandridge was found no longer living in her Hollywood apartment from an accidental overdose of antidepressants. She passed away, broke, forgotten, and alone, another victim of an industry that used her talent but discarded her humanity. And finally, Talula Bankhead, the most scandalous woman in Hollywood history, and proud of it. While other stars tried to hide their affairs, addictions, and adventures, Talula flaunted them. She was intimate with both men and women, used controlled substances at dinner parties, and once performed cartwheels at a formal event while wearing no underwear. The woman was a force of nature wrapped in a cloud of cigarette smoke and chaos. Talula's outrageousness may have been a rebellion against her aristocratic Southern upbringing, Born into one of Alabama's most prominent political families, her grandfather and uncle were U.S. senators, and her father, William Bankhead, was Speaker of the House. She was expected to be a proper Southern belle, but her mother, Adelaide, passed away when Talula was just 10 days old, leaving her to be raised by her political father and various relatives. Her father was often absent due to his political career. She learned early that shocking behavior got her the attention she craved, and she never stopped seeking it. Her most famous quote about her preferences: "I don't know what I am, darling. I've tried everything once." Actually, she tried everything multiple times. She pursued Greta Garbo so relentlessly that Garbo would flee parties when Bankhead arrived. She claimed to have been intimate with Hattie McDaniel during the filming of Lifeboat, breaking racial and social taboos simultaneously. But Talula's scandals went way beyond romance. She was an absolutely outrageous drunk and substance user who made no attempt to hide it. At one party, she greeted guests completely unclothed, except for high heels. When someone complained, she put on a necklace. She'd use controlled substances openly at restaurants, asking waiters if they wanted some. Bankhead's drinking was destructive even by Hollywood standards. She'd go on benders that lasted weeks, showing up to performances drunk, if she showed up at all. During one Broadway run, she was so intoxicated, she forgot her lines and started making up dialogue. The other actors just had to go with it. She treated everyone like they existed for her amusement. She'd call everyone darling because she couldn't remember names. She'd make passes at anything that moved. When she met Joan Crawford, who was with her husband, Talula announced, "Darling, you're divine. I've had an affair with your husband. You'll be next." Even Alfred Hitchcock, who directed her in Lifeboat, said working with her was like trying to direct a force of nature. She'd show up to set drunk, refuse to wear underwear, which caused issues during scenes where she had to climb ladders, and openly proposition cast and crew of both genders. Despite her shocking behavior, Bankhead had a compassionate side that revealed her true character. She was one of the first celebrities to openly support civil rights, becoming one of the first women to appear on the cover of Ebony magazine. During World War II, she helped Jewish families escape Nazi Germany, using her political connections to cut through red tape and save lives. She was incredibly generous to young actors and struggling artists, often paying their rent or medical bills anonymously. Her outrageous persona masked a genuinely caring person who felt deeply for others' suffering. But the addictions won in the end. Her final years were a haze of pills and booze. She passed away in 1968 at 66, her body destroyed by decades of abuse. The amazing thing about Talula was her complete lack of shame. While other stars hid their scandals, she celebrated them. She was who she was, a brilliant actress, a revolutionary, an addict, a force of chaos. She lived exactly as she pleased and didn't give a darn what anyone thought. In Hollywood, where image was everything, Talula Bankhead said, "Forget your image," and lived her truth, as destructive as it was. So there you have it, 10 more Hollywood legends whose personal lives were far darker than anything they portrayed on screen. From Joan Crawford's wire hangers to Gene Tierney's electroshock therapy, these stories reveal the human cost of fame in Hollywood's so-called golden age. What strikes me most about these stories is how many of these tragedies were preventable. Judy Garland didn't have to be given controlled substances as a child. Gene Tierney didn't have to be tortured with electroshock therapy. These weren't just personal failings or individual tragedies. They were failures of an industry that treated human beings as disposable commodities. The studio system created these stars, marketed their images, profited from their talents, and then discarded them when they became inconvenient. Some, like Clara B and Fatty Arbuckle, were innocent victims of scandal and mental illness. Others, like John Wayne and Frank Sinatra, were complicated figures capable of both great cruelty and surprising kindness. Do these scandals diminish their artistic achievements? That's for you to decide. But one thing's certain. Behind every glamorous publicity photo was a real person struggling with real pain, often in ways that would be considered criminal if they happened today. What did you think of these stories? Were you shocked by any of them? And who should we cover in Part 3? Because trust me, we've barely scratched the surface of Hollywood's dark side. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's hidden history. Thanks for joining me on this journey through Tinseltown's most closely guarded secrets.